Welcome to Main Street Podcast, an opportunity to talk to Idaho's elected leaders about the issues that matter to you. Welcome to the Idaho Main Street Podcast. We're here with one of our favorites, Representative Josh Wheeler out of District 35, who just taught me that the Caesarean section is actually named after Julius Caesar.
There is some benefit to being married to a doctor.
Wow.
Brennan.
I'm going to fact check that, because if I repeat that and somebody laughs at me, it's coming on you.
Just ask AI. AI will never lie to you, Brennan.
Hasn't yet. Josh, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Good to be here again.
We know you're busy. You got a lot on your calendar. But it's been a minute since you've been in studio with us.
It has been a minute. It was a whole year ago, I think.
You haven't been doing anything fun, have you?
I mean, I am preparing to narrate the story of Ferdinand at the Soda Springs Library later this afternoon, which is kind of fun.
Okay. And are you prepared for all the big words?
No.
No, yeah, we'll sound them out. Yeah. Ferdinand, so is this for a specific class?
This is my daughter has been doing outreach to rural communities. She puts together performances to try to expose kids to music and fun stories in a different way. And so we've done the Victor and Driggs Library already. We did Ammon a couple weeks ago. So Soda Springs is next on the schedule. Anyway, she had just asked me if I would be the narrator months ago when she put it together. And I said, sure, that sounds fun.
Wow.
I have experience reading that book, so I'll read it to a bunch of little kids. Sure.
I'm torn with whether to be happy for you or jealous that she didn't ask me. Apparently,
we probably haven't made a proper introduction yet.
Apparently, podcast host doesn't really translate
into narrator.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Now, you just finished up with the session.
We did.
It's your first full term that you're finishing now. So you've now have 2 sessions under your belt. Talk to us a little bit about how the first session, second session differed and or if they felt the exact same.
No, they definitely were different. I mean, there were some historical things that happened in this session that we've literally never seen before in the state. But for me, as a freshman legislator, the contrast between an election year session and a non-election year session was evident.
Explain to us why that would be different.
I just feel like we saw a lot more bills. I mean, we almost set a record of the number of bills that the legislature even considered this year. Like, we saw a lot more bills, and we saw a lot more bills that I think people would consider charged, right? That could become an election billboard or that could become an ad, and I kind of knew it was going to be that way, but to be in the middle of it and see it was just a totally different experience.
So you wouldn't say necessarily one's more effective than the other before the election year after? Or is that the case that, are these charged bills eating up time and space, or are they needed?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, but it's not that they're not needed. I think a lot of them were important conversation. I mean, one of the most important bills that I think we passed this session was Senate Joint Memorial 102, which put the federal government on notice that they are failing in their duties with securing the southern border. And that we also need a functional guest worker program, because we hear from our ag industry, our ag partners, our farmers, our ranchers, our dairymen, that they need that to be working. They want to do things right. People want to do things right. And so that's a charged issue, right?
Yeah, sure.
We needed to talk about it, right? And I think it just has a different energy on an election year than it did on the non-election year, right?
Yeah, and you were supportive of what the governor's been doing in sending some of the Idaho State Police down to the border.
Absolutely. I was so glad to see him do that, and glad that we could, I could vote for the funding to send them down there, because that gives them training that they really couldn't get any other way. And what's really nice is they're able to bring that training to understand, how are these cartels operating? How are people exploiting some of our weaknesses as a country on the border, and bring some of that knowledge back and apply it, here, so that we can reduce the scourge of fentanyl on the streets of Idaho, that we can just be that little bit smarter, that little bit more ahead of the game with these bad actors in the state of Idaho.
So if I live in Victor, Idaho, and I read a headline about a crisis at the southern border, how is that actually affecting me?
Well, we had a great conversation with Sheriff Hulse here in Bonneville County, and he will tell you that there are cartel actors in the state of Idaho. So that's how it affects you. When you see that the door is wider open than it should be for these bad guys, frankly, to be bringing horrible drugs or even worse, human trafficking, into the country, that can get up to Victor, Idaho. That can get down into, Montpelier, Idaho, because they come off of those corridors and they take advantage of good people in our communities. And so that's how it can affect us.
So when it comes to immigration policy, Representative Wheeler can't impeach Secretary Mayorkas. Josh Wheeler can't tell President Biden that he's got to close that. But there are some things you can do.
Right.
When it comes to public safety, you voted and supported mandatory minimums for fentanyl trafficking.
Yeah, and that was one of the, and again, there's a charged bill in a way that we talked about on election year, and it's been multiple years to get that done. But I think that was super important because it sends a message to drug traffickers, to cartels even, and says, when you come in Idaho, you raised your risk level by a factor of 100. Like we're going to put you away if we catch you with these quantities of fentanyl and other obviously deadly drugs. But fentanyl was the one we got past this session. Super important to get that done.
Yeah, because it came close your first session.
I mean, it didn't make it first session.
But it didn't make it.
Yeah. And so, you got enough people that pushed back on it. And, I don't want to assign malicious intent to the people who argued against it that first year, but they were wrong in this case. And it shows that they were wrong that we were able to get it done this year.
What changed?
There were some tweaks to the amount of the mandatory minimum sentence, I believe. And then it's interesting because there was something different this year versus last year, which was that there was an additional penalty for somebody who, like, if I gave you the drug and then you died, I could be charged with murder at that case.
Sure.
And so that was an addition to the law. And so in some ways it was stronger. And I will say that's one thing I feel like I've learned as a freshman legislator is that this process, it's deliberative, it's difficult sometimes, stuff can take a wild detour, but in the end, we get better product, we get better law because we really have to work for it. We really have to work to get solutions for the Idaho people,
Yeah, we've spoken in the past about how the largest challenge you may have experienced is just the general learning curve of coming into a new legislative body, dealing with different characters. You say some you got to work through, some you got to work around. There's just a lot going on. Do you feel like you've really made significant progress on that learning curve from session 1 to session 2?
Oh, definitely between the two sessions. Yeah. I mean, that's like a night and day. Now, does the parabola, and I'm sorry to my geometry teacher if I'm forgetting what that is, does it have a long climb still? Absolutely it does. I mean, there is, so much in terms of parliamentary procedure and some of the traditions and some of the expectations that I think can still be learned, right? And there's still so much that I can learn about the other legislators that I work with and how to better work with them and what are the more important issues to them. I mean, there's a lot of that I did learn, but boy, there's still plenty of it to experience for sure.
What kind of value does it have with Senator Mark Harris being a legislative veteran in your corner and there is a Senate seat mate constantly being able to give you advice or tell you how things go?
Well, I'll say two things to that, Brennan. And one thing I think people have heard me say often is Southeast Idaho should be particularly happy with their representation. Like, we have got a group of legislators over there who have learned to work together, who care so much about our regional issues and have found, allies and friends and good people that they can work with from all over the state to get things done that are important to Southeast Idaho. And Senator Mark Harris is a prime example of that, right? He brings so much experience. He brings so much I'm going to call it what I think it is, which is just earthy wisdom, like there's a certain kind of wisdom that you learn by being a rancher, by being just a native son of Idaho that you can't get almost any other way. But I mean, he's been a tremendous mentor to me and to a lot of other freshman legislators. And so it's really great to be able to bounce ideas off of leaders like that and have them say, okay, but did you think about this? And well, just so 15 years ago, the state considered it this way, and here's how it went sideways. And, by the way, there's a bear trap right here. And if you step there, it's going to hurt real bad, And so, yeah, Senator Harris is a great example of someone who is willing to be an incredible legislative mentor and just a friend and, man, just a good person overall.
Yeah. I think a good birthday present would be a bumper sticker that says earthy wisdom for him. And if not a bumper sticker, it does sound kind of like a car air freshener smell. Earthy wisdom. We'll take it. You did some stuff this session you're really proud of, particularly when it comes to healthcare. Is it because you've been so involved with healthcare? Your wife is a doctor. What was it that prompted you to say, look, healthcare access is an issue in my district?
So, I mean, that's a big part of it. Obviously, my first session when we came up with the Bridge Year Physicians Bill, that was from conversations with my wife and with her colleagues, and former residency directors and that kind of stuff. And so that experience really tied into my saying, hey, this is a little solution to a little problem that we could bring. And then what's interesting that happens is now people know that I did that. And so other legislators and other organizations approached me and said, hey, what about this for the next step? And, then I'm able to, again, because of some of that experience and become some of those connections, say, well, yeah, that could be valuable to have. I mean, I even learned great things putting that bill together with the international physicians. 25% of the physicians in the United States were trained in another country, trained and practiced in another country, right? And so why shouldn't Idaho, get their hooks into some of those people and attract them to come practice in our state? And so, again, it was sort of one builds upon the other, because I had been involved in that Bridge Year Physician Bill the first year, then the second year, the additional opportunities came my way in that space.
Yeah, so I guess we need to get in the details. For those that aren't aware, what are you doing with international physicians, bringing them to Idaho? What does the legislation do? And why would that affect my life as a resident of Grace, Idaho?
Well, that's a fair question. So, I mean, what the International Physicians Bill does is it creates a 3-year provisional license. This is for someone who was trained and practiced as a physician in another country and then has immigrated here legally to the United States. It creates a 3-year provisional license for them to work under a supervising Idaho physician. They've got to have a sponsoring clinic or hospital or organization like that. And at the end of that 3 years, they have the opportunity to become a fully licensed Idaho physician in their specialty, right? And so what that does is it means we don't take up valuable residency spaces, because these people are, what they would have to do up until this point is essentially start over, like go back to residency, get all kinds of hours in a specialty that they already have. I mean, for this bill, they have to have 5 years of experience in their field.
So we're not talking about brand new. These are people that know what they're doing, that have come to Idaho.
100%.
That you would trust your life
These are veteran physicians. Yeah. And what was really fun about putting that particular bill together, Brennan, is I met people or I heard stories multiple times of physicians that this would have affected. For example, that gentleman that worked with my wife for many years, he was an immigrant from Greece, married a cute little gal from Pocatello, Idaho. They had 4 kids. He was family practice doc. He'd practiced for 8 years in Greece before he moved. And he never felt like he had time to go back and start over and go through the American, medical school and residency. And so he never practiced as a family doc here in Idaho. He worked for a supplements manufacturer, so it was kind of healthcare adjacent, right? But it was like, geez, what a missed opportunity that guy could have filled. Idaho is one of the lowest states in the nation with our physician per capita. And so I think finding all the right solutions that we can to increase the number of physicians in Idaho is going to increase healthcare access. And, frankly, if we get some of those physicians to move to places like Grace, Idaho, like that is just going to improve that community's overall wellness and access to healthcare.
Yeah. So, I mean, it may go without saying, but more doctors means better healthcare. It means I don't have to maybe wait as long to get appointments, but it also means we increase the tax base. It means we can help revitalize some communities.
And it also means more opportunities for, physician's assistants, nurse practitioners, nurses, the supporting professions that come along with physicians, right? And look, let's just say it. That means that Idaho's strong CTE programs.
How far did we get in without your 3 favorite letters? Love it.
It means that the kids that are taking advantage of those opportunities have more opportunities to stay in Idaho, right? To work as healthcare techs or med techs or nurses or what have you.
Oh, that's fantastic. Kate, that was bill number 1 that you kind of put together, was the international one. The second one was aimed more towards students who may not have matched for a residency.
Sure.
Now, for people who haven't been involved in medical school or matching, I mean, they may be thinking, well, what is this process even like, and why is it important that we have legislation to fix it?
Yeah, so these are people that have gone through medical school, graduated from medical medical school. They've passed all 3 levels of the USMCLE, which is the med school exam, the MSAT or whatever I think is what we call it for short. But and they will apply to residency programs and say, like, I want to do this specialty. I want to go into pediatrics, and boy, I'd like to do it over here in Nebraska, or we'd like for them to say, I'd like to do it in Idaho. We do have a great growing pediatrics residency opportunity here in Idaho, but we need more residencies, obviously. But however they say, they put that formula together, and then on the other side, the residency programs are putting there, like, well, we want a med school graduate that is, got this kind of experience and coming from here and wants to do this. And then, the computer spits it out and says, you match.
Like Tinder for doctors.
It is. I am not sure that we should be describing it in that way, but sure.
Speak my language, Josh.
Swipe left for your
Exactly.
for your med school graduate, right? And so I think the number is 14% of med school graduates don't match to a residency each year.
Because it's just not a good fit at first.
Right. Maybe that geographically they didn't match. I remember I heard a story one time about there was a couple that they were both med school graduates, and they both wanted to go to the same place. Well, one matched, the other didn't because there wasn't enough space. It could be a lot of things. And so a lot of times those people, they will reapply for a residency program the following year, but they end up with a whole year that's a gap. And sometimes they don't end up working in the healthcare industry for that whole year. They'll go to work in a hardware store, or they'll be a landscaper, or they'll flip burgers, which are great jobs, but you're losing an opportunity to gain more experiences in the healthcare industry. And so, the Bridge Your Physician bill said, come to Idaho. We've got a 1-year license for you to work under a supervising Idaho physician, and then, go match to your residency after that year. And obviously, one of the intents behind that is you set the hook. You let somebody get a taste of Idaho.
Yeah.
They get through with their residency program, because a lot of times our med students end up in other states for their residency programs. And a lot of times you stay where you did your residency program. My wife and I are an example of that. Thanks to the family practice residency in Pocatello, we stayed in Idaho. Now, might we have stayed in Idaho because we're Idaho kids anyway? Probably. But we just need to set that hook as much as possible and bring back those good physicians as they come out of residencies. So
none of us want Idaho to get overrun. Well, the population growth we have is already unreal, but there is a very serious issue with Idaho not having enough doctors.
yes.
And that's what you're
100%.
addressing with these two things.
100%. And we've got to keep looking at other solutions, for our physician workforce, whether it is, but this is obviously one of Governor Little's favorite things to say, but I think there is regulatory burden that we can reduce on our physicians, on our hospitals, on our clinics.
So when it comes to regulations, you've been a big supporter of working alongside Governor Little to cut the red tape to go through. That at times can sound like a campaign slogan, like I'm against regulation and I'm cutting red tape, but it means something. As a small business owner, as somebody who is heavily involved in the Main Street, why are these unnecessary regulations hurting businesses like yours?
Well, when we've got unnecessary or unneeded regulations, Brennan, what it does is it has a chilling effect on Idahoans. We are creative, we are scrappy, we are entrepreneurial almost by nature. You meet a native Idahoan and you're going to just sense how independent they are, right? They're going to get things done their way. And if you want to help them, you're going to have a great time. And if you don't want to help them, you want to get out of the way, right?
Yeah.
And that's how our business owners are, especially our small business owners. They've got a creative idea and it's going to be something successful, and it's going to create an opportunity for, another Idahoan probably, or another business. And if our regulations are too wonky, if they're too Byzantine, if they're too much, it just makes an entrepreneur and an inventive and independent Idahoan have to go, I better go look for another idea, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what we always have to look at. We just have to say, how is this regulation going to affect that, small business owner's decision-making process? Like, it's going to enter in at some point. What is it going to slow down? Well, if it's going to slow down the wrong kind of things, like, more opportunities for Idaho students, if it's going to slow down, better economic growth, better tax base, then we need to say, okay, that one probably should go on the red tape reduction role.
And there's a difference. Not all regulations are created equal. So, for example, I would like my butcher to have some regulations on how he's labeling my meat, right? I would
Fair enough.
prefer to know, right? So you're not in a mindset of get rid of all regulations, but can you maybe describe some of the regulations you've dealt with that you say these are Byzantine, these are unnecessary?
So I think one of the regulations that we dealt with this year as a legislature dealt with pharmacy benefit managers. And I think I lost the page count, but it was at least a 16-page bill, right? Dealing with, hey, when you're addressing our small independent pharmacies, we need you to stop doing this. We need you to cut down on some of the audits. We need you to increase your transparency, for pricing so that they can be more transparent with their customers, on and on. We want our small independent pharmacists to remain in our communities because they know Mrs. Smith down the road. Mm-hmm. They know her history. They know how to best tell her, this is how this particular drug is going to affect everything else that you're dealing with, right? And if we just end up with a bunch of national chains and or mail order, Shark Tank pharmaceuticals, our small communities, our rural communities really lose in that equation, right? And so that's an example where we really went after some existing regulation, and it was quite a conversation. I mean, if you follow the history, I mean, there were two versions of that bill, there were amendments, it was back and forth, and I think I lost track of the number of people and I wasn't even the sponsor. I just was on the Health and Welfare Committee, right? That I got to sit down and have some in-depth conversations with about trying to understand, how can we improve outcomes for Idaho citizens and especially for Idaho independent pharmacies in this case. So that's just one example that I could give you, Brennan.
Oof. Pharmacy benefit managers, nothing sexier than that. Let's debate in a 16. Did you read the whole bill? Did you read all 16 pages?
I did.
Attaboy.
Please don't ask me to quote from any specific paragraph, though.
I won't. Not now. We'll get you later. Another thing that may at times sound like a campaign slogan that we hear that I think has some depth behind it is this idea of empowering local government or supporting local control.
Yeah.
Former Ammon city councilman, what's your perspective as you went to Boise and saw maybe the legislature was taking a little bit too much of the local government's responsibilities? Well,
here's the thing that I feel like I learned in this first couple of years, Brennan, with regards to that. And again, I want to just compliment the cohort of legislators from Southeast Idaho, because I think a lot of times we get over there in the great state of Ada, right? And we see things that are happening in Boise, Meridian, Nampa, which are pretty big cities compared to most of what we deal with here in Southeast Idaho, right? And a lot of times their city governments will get crosswise with somebody on the legislature, and all of a sudden it becomes almost this kind of personal project. And the example I'll give you with that is urban renewal districts.
Sure.
Cities do not have a lot of tools to incentivize growth of sort of the commercial tax base and just commercial properties and opportunities, right? And I've seen the city of Ammon use urban renewal districts very effectively twice already, right? When before I was on the council, there was the urban renewal district that essentially is why we have Target and Albertsons and Staples, right? And if you go back and look at the photos from 20 plus years ago, that was a mobile home park. And the urban renewal district created the incentive that has turned that into part of City of Ammon's commercial corridor, right? Which obviously feeds into the city's tax base, helps us pay for our police force, helps us try to keep on top of plowing the snow and the potholes and all that kind of wonky stuff that a city takes care of, right? So that urban renewal district actually closed early, and so got the tax back onto the rolls earlier than was expected. And I think, I'm sure you can find somebody that's unhappy with it, but that's a great commercial corridor for Ammon. And so they said, hey, this tool worked well. Let's apply it again. And you're getting to see it in real time now as the second urban renewal district that City of Ammon is running right now, which I did have the opportunity and was glad to vote for as a city council member, right? It's starting to have, we've got elite cars the elite car sales dealer. We've got the new mattress store that's come up. John Adams is eventually going to go through and connect, and you're going to have a continuation of that hit road commercial corridor. Again, partially because that urban renewal district has existed. And so I get over there my first year, and there is this like urban renewal district hate. And there are bills ready to just nuke it from orbit. And part of it came about because of some perceptions of what had happened with the Facebook Meta project over there in Kuna, right? And there was this perception that the urban renewal district had gotten to double dip with some other tax incentives that I think the state had offered to Meta, and I get it. That made some people a little grouchy, right? But it ignored where that tool had been effectively used in all other parts of the state, like Southeast Idaho, like Ammon, and Ammon's obviously just the examples that I know most personally, right?
Sure.
And so we had to be able to, as legislators, have some hard conversations there and say, hey, this tool is working right in 99 out of 100 places. Like, let's not gut it just because we've had one bad actor. And then you dig into the perception, and the perception wasn't actually really 100% accurate, right? That tool had actually probably been used correctly there in Kuna, but if you don't have those conversations, if you can't collaborate and work with people, well, then we end up with a worse solution, right? But
yeah.
I think that's a great example of where there was some potential overreach from the state into our local government tools. And our local governments have very few tools,
right,
to get done what they try to do. And again, they're scrappy, they're creative, just like the rest of the Idahoans.
But when you ask people, about some of the big issues, at the end of the day, most people just care, like, did my street get plowed? Is that pothole getting fixed? Why can't I turn right on this road? Why do I have to wait, behind the stoplight?
I can't remember if I've had this conversation with you before, Brennan, but it's one of my favorite things about having gotten involved in local politics is that you get to go have face-to-face conversations with people and recognize how much you have in common with them. That, you do care that your kid can get to their soccer game without so many potholes, right? You do care that your snow is plowed so that you and your kids can go up and ski at the local ski hill, right? Like, you care about your schools. You want to engage with your local teachers and principals and have good relationships and work as a team together to get the best results for your kids, right? And it's such a contrast to what we see when people get out on social media, right? And it's this like constant fight. And I remember reading an article just a few weeks ago about what a small percentage of people it is that is making all of that kind of angry noise on social media. And so for me, every time I get to go knock on a door with somebody or go sit down in somebody's house and talk to them about issues they care about, man, it is so refreshing.
Oh, good. I saw on your social media that you were out knocking with your favorite, which I was a little offended that your favorite supporter was Laramie and not myself. But that's fine. And that she had said that her favorite part of the campaign was talking face-to-face with people.
She loves people by nature. And so I'll be honest, one of the hard things about getting involved in politics was some of just the divisiveness and some of the tendency by some individuals to kind of bully and just insult. That was hard for her because she just thinks the world of people in general, right? I don't know that she has a cynical bone in her body yet. And so for her, again, to come with me and have those kind of face-to-face conversations, it really kind of renews her faith in humanity is probably how I should say it, but and that's what we have to do. We have to have more face-to-face conversations. That's how our country and our state has advanced through the ages. Is we have worked together face-to-face, not keyboard to keyboard. Mm-hmm. We have worked together face-to-face.
And you try to do that. You have how many counties you represent?
5.
A portion of Bannock, correct?
Yep.
And then
Bonneville, Bannock, Bear Lake, Caribou, and Teton counties.
And you get around. You put some miles on that truck and you go and visit everyone from Victor to Soda.
I did cross the 80,000
Congrats.
mark after my second session.
As you're out talking to people, I know that some issues that are important to them include what you've done with your 3 favorite letters, career technical education, right? So we can talk launch. We can talk. You actually, I think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about that. You took a tour of the Idaho Falls Career Technical Education High School, and actually had some good face-to-face conversations with some of the students and learned that some of the work you're doing in Boise is having immediate effects on some of these Idahoans' futures.
So two of my favorite success stories that I'll share with you briefly, Brennan, to sponsor my first year was the Career Ready Students Program. And that was one that got funding to our K through 12 career technical education programs, right? So then I get to go out and talk with the students in D91 at their CTE center. And they have a new mill and a new lathe and a new table mill for their program because of that grant program, the Career Ready Students Program. And I get to meet a student who, his principal there at CTE Center will tell you, like, he was prepared to drop out from his normal high school. He was just wore out. It just wasn't his thing, right? She managed to find him, connect him with the CTEC program. Now he has applied for and is accepted. This is a senior in high school, applied for and been accepted to ISU's machinist program.
Wow.
It was CTE that made that connection for him, that made him realize, oh, education can connect me to something that I'm good at, that is practical, that, so now Idaho's going to have a new machinist. That's a big deal, right? That's a huge success story. The other one, obviously, that I got to have a conversation with is a kid who, he was under the hood of a vehicle at the time in the auto mechanics program, and his teacher said, "Hey, come out here. I want you to talk to Representative Wheeler for just a minute," and shook his hand, and he says, "I want to be an electrician. Like, what do I got to do?" Right? This kid's a junior, right? And I said, "Well, first of all, here is my card, right? And send me your resume." But again, he is getting to connect with that hands-on type of education that somebody who's going to be an electrician is going to have an affinity for that. They're going to have a talent for that. And so when you put the kids who have those kind of talents in a situation where they get to use those talents, that's a win for everybody. It's a win for that kid. It's a win for their family. And it is a win for our state and community because they're more likely to stay here. They're more likely to get into one of those in-demand careers and just continue to make a difference.
Yeah, it's wild to think that such impactful decisions are made at such a young age for these kids, and they don't know what they don't know. And so providing them more options and tools to say, hey, but what if instead of you thinking that you have to spend 4 years studying trigonomics and do all this stuff and learning what a parabola is, right? Good job.
Right.
What if instead your future could look like this? And then they have the option.
And it's one of the things that I honestly have to tip my hat to past legislatures because they have really laid a foundation for success where we have provided so many choices to our Idaho families and students in the public education system. Because with open enrollment, a family can choose to take their student anywhere, really. Mm-hmm. And with the charter schools that we have continued to support and stand up, one of the ones obviously that I was super excited to see coming to Idaho Falls last year was the Elevate Academy program, which is a 6th through 12th grade charter school that really focuses on integrated CTE to their curriculum and ends up with their juniors and seniors having a career plan and connecting with local businesses for a couple hours out of their day and getting actual on-the-job experience while they're still in high school, right? So we are providing all these choices inside of our Idaho public education system. That's fantastic. And so I genuinely applaud the past legislatures who have helped, maintain that constitutional requirement and help us meet that constitutional requirement. And I hope that we can continue to support that kind of innovation and just smart thinking.
Yeah. No, that's great. But we've talked about this. You're not going to be a good politician if you don't take all the credit, Josh. Stop thinking, this was you and only you, okay? Remember that for the next time. Look, we know you're busy and you have a lot of things you got to do. As we kind of wind down here, a couple questions we got to get in is number one, what's on the to-do list if you end up going back for another couple sessions?
Yeah. So let me tell you two that I think are top of mind for me. And surprise, surprise, one is, again, healthcare related and healthcare access related. But I think that there's some regulatory modernization that we can do, especially with the prior authorization system that we see our insurance companies use. It has become overly burdensome for our physicians. And I think in too many occasions, it is standing between a local physician and their patient, making the decision that best serves that patient. And so I really want to take a look at that regulation. I've seen some draft bills already that I think will help us simplify that system. The other one is frankly more serious, but youth vaping is it's out of control. Honestly, it is a serious problem. And, the Trump administration actually tried to do a really good job to get their FDA to say, no more flavored vaping products, because those are the ones that attract the youth, right?
Sure.
But they're, like often happens, there was a loophole, and that manufacturing industry is exploiting it, and so those type of products are still on the market way more than they should be in Idaho, and because of that, our youth are falling into that habit more than they should, and I really want to do something, and I've had some great conversations with legislators I trust and think the world of that, are already kind of working that direction, and I want to support them to help us curtail that.
So we talk about problems that you see that you want to work on. There are problems that you don't see that need to be worked on. And I was at a legislative forum where you had opened yourself up to saying, look, if there's a problem in the community that we may not be seeing or we need more information about, reach out, because we need to get this stuff started before the session. So, this is the type of time where you got to start building up the legislation and establishing coalitions rather than get there day one.
Oh, yes.
And say, okay, so Senator Wheeler, I've got an issue for you. Is that something you're comfortable reaching out, saying to anyone in our audience or viewership that they can reach out to you if they have an idea for something that needs to be fixed?
Absolutely. Go to wheelerforidaho.com and send me an email is probably the easiest way. And I've actually already had some conversations just this past week about regulations with the trucking industry that I think were really good. I've had conversations, I was in a great couple's home the other day with some of their friends and neighbors, and we were talking about a bill that Representative Petsky passed last session to require a financial literacy class before graduation.
Oh, yeah.
And it was great to hear from these parents, of the high school students about, okay, that's a great idea. Here's where it's not working. Here's where it is working, right? I said, oh, please tell me more. Like, as you see more of those, give me that kind of feedback, and I told them, I said, like, our state superintendent, Debbie Crutchfield, she is forward thinking. She wants to get things done, and she will listen and make a change if it needs to be made.
So, I'm a big fan of that piece of legislation.
Yeah.
There's some little tweaking we need to do, but yeah, big fan of that.
Yeah. And I don't know that there's ever perfect legislation.
Exactly.
And that's why we need, that's part of what's beautiful about our American and our Idahoan system of governance, right? Is that we have that ability to communicate with citizens and hear from each other and have a back and forth dialogue. And again, get better results long-term through that process.
We often hear the phrase, it would take an act of Congress because of how hard it is to actually get something through Congress. But we don't hear the phrase, it would take an act of the Idaho legislature, because you guys you can do things. Like an average day Joe like myself could reach out in theory to you and say, this is a problem. I think we need to do something about it. And it could end up signed by the governor, and that can still happen in Idaho.
It absolutely can. Yeah, and of course, the most fun example of that is the Idaho State Dinosaur, right? That here, a class of fourth graders from Yukon, Idaho, writes a letter to say the Erictodromeus should be the state dinosaur, and it happens, right? That's just a very colorful example of what does and can happen every day. Honestly, we passed legislation right towards the end of the session this time that was brought by a legislator from North Idaho, dealing with a therapy that was kind of a last line of defense therapy that could help kids, adults, et cetera, with severe depression and anxiety. And it had come about because of a family who was having to travel to Massachusetts to access this therapy when it was available in Idaho, but we needed a legislative tweak for them to be able to access it. So
it can be done.
It can be done, yeah. And you're right. In Idaho, probably more than a lot of other states, it can be done.
Yeah. Well, we're going to finish today with a new segment called Questions from a Colleague. I had a
Did he just invent this just now? Is that what just
had a text message come in from one of your colleagues asking if we would ask you. This came from one you may not know him. Senator Treg Burnt asked if we could ask you on the podcast, what is your favorite board game and why? And would you identify as a nerd, Representative Wheeler?
I would identify as a giant nerd, yes. And he does know that. I hate the favorite board game question because it literally is like asking me to choose between my 6 children, which
he set you up.
And what I will say, just so that the people out there in the world of Main Street hear it, go play Wingspan. Go get Wingspan. Play that with your kids. It's about bird watching. So it's the most esoteric theme ever, but you will have a great time with your family.
Thank you for answering that question from your colleague. I think he referenced the fact that when he was on the podcast, you prompted to ask why he preferred snowboarding over skiing or vice versa.
Oh, and so this is his vengeance?
This is his some vengeance. What's your board game? So, Josh, we know how busy you are. We really do appreciate what you're doing in the legislature and your time with us today. We're going to have you back to cover a few more things. We didn't get into school facilities update. We didn't dig into launch. There's so many things we didn't dig into, but we'll have the time later, hopefully.
Fair enough. Keep up the good work, Brennan. Appreciate the conversations that you're having.
All right. Until then, and great tie. For those that are only listening, Josh is rocking an Idaho potato tie today.
I try.
Yep. Thanks. Until next time.